On camera, Rashida Tlaib is seen discussing how they could go about arresting White House officials. I don't think it's the most shocking thing ever, but maybe this is just because we're becoming desensitized. I mean, is it crazy now to see an acting Democrat in Congress say, we need the DC police perhaps? How do we go and arrest them? Where do we hold them? And that to me is kind of scary. But the reason I say it's not super shocking is that the rhetoric from the squad and people like Tlaib has been increasingly off, just off, right? So you see like Ocasio-Cortez does this big tweet where she says the bigger national scandals, they won't impeach Trump. And then a couple weeks later, she's like, it's so boring. I am over it. We've got other things to work on. And I'm like, do you have a plan? Do you know what you're doing? So now we see this. And I just go, yeah, come on. What else is new? The squad are crazy. But maybe it is really serious and we should take it seriously, because think about what would actually happen if House Democrats tried to order marshals or police to go and arrest Bill Barr. I mean, the DOJ is not going to do it. Trump is the head of the executive branch. It wouldn't happen. But then you're going to start seeing people on the left say, how do you actually arrest those who run the executive branch if Trump can pardon at a federal level? Like, how does this work? So this all goes back to subpoenas. And here's like the bigger problem here. And I think the big root of this, and I'll have a bigger video for you coming up at 4 p.m. is there's literally no truth anymore. And I know in politics, I should say. So, I could tell you something like, see that window? If I throw this rock at the window will break, and you can say it likely will. There's a chance you miss. There's a chance the glass is strong, but for the most part, we get it. Rock through window, broken glass. But in politics, we have partisan media and failures to fact check, and we don't know who's right or who's wrong, and we have framing devices. So when you look at it from the perspective of the Democrats, they say something like, we subpoenaed Bill Barr and Wilbur Ross. They did not comply with subpoenas. Therefore, they are being held in contempt of Congress. And that's the big issue here. The story from July. That the House held William Barr and Wilbur Ross in criminal contempt of Congress. Now, here's the thing. Ross and Barr both claimed they complied with the subpoenas and cooperated and submitted tens of thousands of documents. I'm sorry, who do you believe? That's it. There's the breakdown. What do you do? Well, the Democrats are insisting something be done. They're held in contempt. They must be arrested. But they're saying, but they completely complied. Who decides? A judge? It doesn't matter. Because you could actually look at William Barr submitting thousands of documents and saying, see, he submitted the documents. And then they'll argue, what about other documents? And then where's the line? Who determines? And I suppose this is why we have checks and balances. But I'm actually concerned I'm worried. I find it disconcerting. What happens when we reach that level? Right now, they want to impeach the president. Man, I am so over that conversation. But, it'll still, there'll still be a glazing over a little bit. It'll get mentioned, right? What happens if they actually do? Trump has warned of a civil war, not his direct quote, somebody else's, but a civil war-like divide, to be completely clear. What happens? What would happen if you actually saw law enforcement personnel take away the Attorney General and the Secretary of Commerce? I mean, we're actually talking about now the potential for civil war, and I'm so sick and tired of this conversation. But I mean, look, you want to talk about the culture war and the fight and the battle over truth and opinion. I get it. We can talk about that. That's kind of a cold civil war. But right now, we're entering the territory of a congresswoman saying, here, let me read this actually. This is the first time we've ever had a situation like this, she said. So they're trying to figure out, no joke, is it the DC police that goes and gets them? We don't know. Where do we hold them? What do you think happens when this cold civil war escalates to the point where they're actually arresting White House officials? Yeah, you're going to see the left say good, and you're going to see the right say, oh my God, this is super corrupt. They've done nothing wrong. We're at the door right now. This is the door. This is the Democrats. Again, I want to stress when I said that it's not shocking, it's because they always say insane things. But I think we need to get real, and the shocking things they say will eventually find their way to reality. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, sitting on her bed on an Instagram Live, talked about concentration camps on the border. that culminated in a man showing up with firebombs and a ghost AR-15, and he died. Like that happened. And his rhetoric in his manifesto that he released, I shouldn't say his letter. It wasn't a big manifesto. It was like a 3-page letter or something. Or maybe it was bigger than that. So maybe it was a manifesto. I don't know. But he parroted her remarks. He looked to her like a leader. I'm not blaming Ocasio-Cortez for the actions of the lunatic. She's entitled to her opinion. She's allowed to broadcast them. And of course, we understand that it could lead to this position. It'll never be her fault, and she will always be allowed to have her opinions. I want to make sure that's clear. We have to make sure we draw the line between actions and deeds. You're allowed to be dumb. You're not allowed to act on being dumb and going and hurting people. That's not an excuse. But what we're seeing now is Rashida Tlaib talking about, the arresting of White House officials. Imagine, if you would, a door in front of us. On the other side of that door is actual civil war. Let me be clear. The general understanding of a civil war is when two factions fight over control of one government. Just because we aren't seeing physical conflict doesn't mean we can't technically say we're at the front door, right? So we've seen street-level conflict between the opposing culture war factions. But now we're seeing an actual fight over control of this government, and it is not through the electoral process. This is where I think we're at the door, okay? What does that turn into? I don't know. But I assure you, if she's actually entertaining this, and they do want to arrest Barr and Ross, I assure you, the other side of that door is close. This is opening that door. If they actually take action, they will have stepped through it. And you will now have an actual faction in the culture war taking direct executive action against the other faction in this cold civil war, or whatever that may be. That is a direct attempt at taking control or at least hurting. So it's hard to know what is that famous shot heard around the world in any kind of circumstance. When we look back to the Revolutionary War, there actually isn't one great shot heard around the world. It's a reference they use to talk about the start of a conflict. But when you're in the weeds, you don't really know where that conflict starts. And I've talked about this quite a bit, that we may look back in 50 years and say it started with Occupy Wall Street. It started in 2013 or 14 with Gamergate. We don't know. It may go back just before, maybe the economic crisis. We don't know what that great catalyst was or the true shot heard around the world. But I would say in terms of falling off the precipice, the point at which we can't turn back would probably be them going and arresting White House officials. So the story says, and I know I don't read it, but I'll give you a little bit of context. Rashida Tlaib told Detroit constituents at her Congress Coffee and Conversation event on Tuesday that lawmakers are focused on how best to take cabinet members into custody. An American Rising PAC tracker caught Tlaib on video speculating what could happen to Trump administration officials held in contempt of Congress, which they've already done. The Congresswoman pointed to Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross and Attorney General William Barr, who were both held in criminal contempt of Congress for defying congressional subpoenas. The House voted 230 to 198. It was the second time in U.S. history a sitting cabinet member was held in criminal contempt of Congress. The first was former Attorney General Eric Holder, whom the Republican-controlled House held in contempt in 2012 after Holder refused to turn over documents pertaining to the Operation Fast and Furious gun-running scandal. Tlaib told said her colleagues are trying to tread carefully in this uncharted territory. I will tell them they can hold all those people right here in Detroit, she joked. We'll take care of them and make sure they show up to the committee hearings. This is a line. This is unprecedented. Never before. So again, going back to that shot heard around the world moment, it maybe would go back to Eric Holder being held in contempt. But here's the thing. It's a different scandal. And I love how they try and act like Obama had no scandals. Oh, please, that was massive. But I don't believe Holder was ever arrested or anything like that. I genuinely I have a legitimate fear over what comes next, and that's always what I've asked when it comes to these conversations about the cultural war, the cold civil war, whatever you want to call it. What comes next? Ocasio-Cortez said concentration camps, and I absolutely hold a negative opinion of her saying that because I do believe you have a responsibility when you have a large audience. I believe she's allowed to say it. It's very complicated. And in that, I understand why there are so many people who claim that we have to get a hold on this speech, right? They say, we know that speech leads to violence. And it's like, well, of course does. Of course it does. We know that ideas have to exist and ideas lead to action. That's not and actions lead to ideas. It's an inverse. It's just consequence. It's just something that happens. The line for me is that she's allowed to do it, and I'm not going to blame her because she said something dumb and then someone else went out and took action. She didn't tell them to do it. If she did say go do X, I'd hold her personally responsible. But what comes next? You say this, please ask yourself this question. Rashida Tlaib saying this, in my opinion, was also extremely irresponsible. She's basically just walked all of us to that door where on the other side, it's faction versus faction. If she's talking about the DC police, she's talking about legal executive authority to go after her political rivals. There was criticism over Trump for talking about Hillary Clinton. Now, here's the thing. The thing about Hillary Clinton and the emails is that what she did with the emails is undeniably a violation of my understanding. She broke the law. I mean, a public official cannot break public record or cannot destroy public record. And she did that. After she was subpoenaed, she destroyed them. In this instance, you have an argument over whether or not they complied fully. When Trump comes out and says Hillary Clinton should be locked up over the email scandal, I look at that and say, I mean, here's a public official who destroyed public records, smashed phones with hammers. We had that one guy who was accused of going on Reddit and asking how to remove her name from emails because they were really concerned about it. I mean, that all sounds like criminal conspiracy. At the very least, you could argue destroying public records is a crime. Maybe she gets 30 days in jail. I mean, it may be more severe than that. I believe the law actually states she would no longer be eligible to hold public office. But that's clear. She was subpoenaed. She destroyed records. No matter what the records are, what they were, or what the point was, she did. Okay, no action taken. You see? Perhaps it was because there was concern it would lead to a dramatic escalation, even though she broke the law. And that I find deplorable. But in this instance, we see that, let me see if I can find this quote. I don't want to, here we go. In a letter to Secretary Pelosi ahead of Wednesday's vote, Barr and Ross decried Democrats' move to hold them in criminal contempt. We strongly disagree with any suggestion that our departments have obstructed this investigation. They wrote, adding that the departments have turned over tens of thousands of documents. It is unfortunate that the House has scheduled a vote to hold 2 sitting members of the president's cabinet in contempt of Congress, given the clear record of cooperation. After the vote, the White House press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, called the move ridiculous and lawless. House Democrats know they have no legal right to these documents, but their shameful and cynical politics know no bounds. Whatever. You can disregard every argument I've made about them. It doesn't matter. That's my personal opinion. In the end, there is a real and serious consequence to arresting members of the Trump cabinet and White House. And I think that's when that's at least a milestone in whatever we could call the cultural civil war, the cold civil war. And Rashida Tlaib is talking about it. This is not the crossing of the line. It's her walking us up to the line and saying, we're trying to figure out how to step over this. That worries me, that they're actually talking about doing it. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know that everything's falling apart. So here's what I'm going to do. Coming up in the next video, I want to talk about the collapse of shared reality, the media. The New York Times published a fake interview with a Trump supporter. And I want to talk about what's going on and how I believe the Democrats are stuck in this cycle with a media that is lying and desperate. And we'll get into that. So go youtube.com/timcast at 4 p.m. That's where it'll be. I will see you all there.